Welcome everyone to our podcast. Today, we're sitting with partners in school nutrition, diving into actionable inspiration to provide you not only ideas, but strategies for success. I'm your host, Maureen Pisanick, and I'm thrilled to explore this topic with you and with some of our school nutrition friends. I am so excited today for our first guest of the morning of our recording here. It is near and dear to me to introduce you to Dr. Sara Adams. Not only, first of all, we met a long time ago in my first life as a food service director. Part of this NutriSmart SNAX podcast is to really deliver you short conversations that I think moved my needle to success in the school nutrition industry. And I had the best wellness committee when I was the Hudson City Schools food service director. Dr. Sara Adams had children in the district and stood right alongside of me to be able to really create some cool, impactful wellness activities, wellness fairs. I mean, we did it all together. It was just such a great opportunity. Of course, board certified pediatrician. She's a mom. She is a grandmother of this cutest little girl. And also, for those of you who are podcast followers, I kind of am a fan because Dr. Sara Adams is kind of famous. She has a podcast called Growing Up with Dr. Sara. So certainly we are so excited to have you here today with us. I could go on and on talking about what our backgrounds have been, but your education, your personality, you are just probably everybody's favorite pediatrician. So much so, I just told you, I had lunch with a former superintendent and he said, oh my gosh, Dr. Sara, she was my kid's pediatrician. And so I just feel like there's so many concentric circles that have connected us both personally and professionally throughout my career in child nutrition. And certainly as a pediatrician, just want to thank you for being such a caring physician. I love your podcast. I really do. I listen to it because, I have girls, right? And I have a middle school girl. So partly those conversations, those tough ones about growing up and puberty and all that, I love listening to your advice for that. So just welcome and thank you so much for being here today. I can't tell you how excited I really am just to be here with you.
Maureen, it's a pleasure. I know we go way back. And I remember those times when my kids were in Hudson High School and how much I really appreciated you coming in and really paving the way for healthy nutrition in the school system. You were just scratching the surface, and I'm proud to see how far you've come since then too.
Oh, I love it. And you had boys. So you were a boy mom, I'm a girl mom. So we can compare battle stories, right? But one of the things I remember about your sweet boys were how willing they were to be participants in the health fair. So I know that, I think people think about wellness committees and inviting students in as something that's formidable, or maybe the kids aren't going to think it's interesting or they're going to poo-poo it. But, I can speak for myself with my girls who are actively involved and have been. Tell me a little bit, if you remember, Gabe, and certainly I just loved those memories of the health fair and them being really mentors. They were older students at the time.
Yes, I think what they loved the most about it was working with the other kids and just inspiring them and playing with them. And that's really what movement is all about, especially for kids. Yes, sports are important, don't get me wrong, but making mealtime, nutrition, movement, exercise fun, that's really what it's all about. And so I think that's what they enjoyed the most about it, was working with the other kids and making it fun for them instead of just something they have to do.
Yeah, they were like the superheroes to the elementary kids. They would just look at those big jerseys and them coming in and really trying the food and doing the things and that activity. I'll never forget, if you recall, my daughter was quite younger and she was in the massage chair. Remember, you laughed. You said, oh my gosh, Hannah's over there getting the chair massage.
I do remember that. I was jealous, so to be honest.
So our wellness work was all encompassing. It was about stress reduction, and it was about movement and activity and nutrition. And it really was trying to connect those dots when we were together working. And I just love that, we are sisters in this work and that we raised our kids with it. And I think it shows now as we have young adult children, right? Hannah is a NICU nurse, and certainly your sons have continued to be active and vibrant in their communities of work. And of course, that grandbaby is just a doll.
Yeah, she's so fun. She's so fun. And, this was over 20 years ago, Maureen. And like I said, we were really starting to pave the way about what you mentioned, that mind, body, and how important it is. And I am glad that our kids have continued in that. And even my grandbaby, we were going for a walk in the park. And I said, do we need the stroller? And she's 2. She looked at me, she goes, we don't need it. I'm going to walk. And she walked the whole way. I was so impressed.
Oh, I just love that. I love that. It often goes that the way that you can say something, but the modeling is just so important. And so, as we talk about this, we treat our schools like our families. So when I'm having conversations, trying to engage and support folks along the way, it is that family touch. Like, what do we do? It isn't do as I say, not as I do, right? It's the modeling. So if you have active parents, your kids are likely active. I think the same thing goes in schools. If you take the time to really invest in your cafeteria staff, empower them, make them feel like they have a role to mentor and really be role models in the cafeteria space, it really does help them engage in the prideful work of creating fresh produce bars and fresh recipes, really engaging that cafeteria as an extension of the classroom. And so I know when I was on your podcast before, we talked about that. It is about, making that every opportunity you have to model or teach, you do this in engaging parents in the process of making choices for their families. Talk to me a little bit. I mean, I know it's a tough world to be in as a parent and raising young children. There's a lot of media noise, if you will. What do you talk about with your parents when they say, hey, I'm really curious, what would you think would be the best way to fuel my student for school, for breakfast before they go, or what, and I know the ever question pack or buy, so tell me, when you have conversations with your parents regarding that, what does that look like?
The first word that comes to mind when you ask that question, and it's such a great question, is planning, and also getting the kids involved, because breakfast is hard. Some kids, just depending on their age, and especially teenagers, as their biological clock kind of changes a little bit, their circadian rhythm, when they wake up in the morning, sometimes they're not really ready to eat. And so, but we know that breakfast is so important.
Yeah.
And it fuels the brain. And studies have shown that when you get breakfast, you are more prepared for school academically, your energy, all the things. So I think planning and getting the kids involved is really important. So sit down as a family and decide, what does that look like to them? What's important to them? What could they think about? Like, what ideas do they have about what they could eat for breakfast? Because if we tell the child, hey, this is what I want you to eat this, sit down, eat this, they're less likely to buy in. So we want to buy in. So just ask, what would you like? And breakfast can look like so many different things. It could be a smoothie that you make with just some frozen fruit and throw in some spinach and kale, like just a little bit. So you get that nutrition, but don't change the color too much. I've learned that the hard way. If it looks too green, they're not going to drink it, and so on. You can add whatever type of milk or non-dairy substitute, or just ice and water. And then other things like peanut butter or bananas, different types of things, that fruit, like I mentioned, and make it easy. But also other things, quick cereal, try to more fiber, less sugar, obviously, But if leftovers the night before sound good to your kid too, that's all right. I think you just have to say to them, like, what does breakfast look like to you, and plan ahead. And that's the same for lunch. And also, I think when we're talking about packing versus not packing, really get an idea of how much time do they have.
Yeah, we talk about this.
Right?
Yeah.
How much time do they have? And what are they really going to eat? Because I remember when I would send lunch and I'd get some of it back and I was like, okay, now I see what they're eating, what they're not eating, or maybe even throwing away. And then my child would say, well, a lot of times I don't want to buy because the line's so long and then I can't have time for recess, so on, or talking. So I think it comes down to, what does a child want to eat? And then what does the timing look like for their lunchtime and recess?
I love that. That's our challenge, to help empower our school lines to move efficiently. My goal is usually 6 to 8 minutes total, start to stop.
Good job.
And we really set up the grab and go stations and a variety of the food court style menus to really accommodate different choices. So I love that this is like, you're feeding me some good feedback to give to our school cafeterias. Don't let them wait too long, give them some choice. And then, certainly advocate, get that seat at the administrative table and say, hey, can we have 30 minutes for lunch? I know it's unheard of in some schools, but sometimes 20 minutes isn't enough. So if you're in line for 8 minutes and you have just about 10 minutes to scarf it down, and we've talked about tricks like lunch before recess or lunch after recess. So, when you have, that timing, if you have the opportunity, recess after lunch allows the student to fuel their activity, but also the flip of that, recess before lunch, allows them to burn it and get hungry and really be serious about eating. So think about what that looks like for your school and really advocate, because what we empower school nutrition professionals to be is the nutrition expert in your district. Like help the administration think through some of those things that might be a barrier for students. You brought up one thing, and I want to say this. We talked last time we were together on your podcast about that choice architecture, right? And I love that you just talked about that in your own pediatrician terms about what you've used that with your parents. Because, for me, this is the timing of this podcast. We're right around the week of October, right? So the Halloween just passed. And so for me as a mom, I didn't say no to treats or no to candy, but I don't leave the candy bowl on the counter. I leave a bowl of apples and a bowl of bananas. And in the morning, there are lots of different choices that can either be, hey, I have time to slice an apple and chew it. I'm a middle schooler and I almost have braces. So, that's a thing, making sure it's appropriate. And, or, hey, I'm running to the bus late, so I'm just going to grab that banana and take it and walk and eat it on the way. And so without saying that, I'm trying to plant the seeds of opportunity. And I think our cafeterias can do the same thing with a well-planned and executed produce bar that offers cut-up choices, whole choices. Meeting students where they're at in terms of both their preference and their time is just one of the challenges we think about on a daily basis. So I love that you talk to parents about that. I think that messaging and being cohesive is a really, really important thing.
And, I'd like to bring up, I read a study recently where it's also about how it appears. And so having like the salad bar and the different colors, doing that at school, or even decorations. And you could do that at home too. If you're going to make something, make little faces if their kids are young, or maybe a little note that inspires your teenager. But make it just a little bit. It doesn't take a lot of effort, but encouraging them and making it colorful and something that it just brings them to it, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Because the study that I read showed that more kids were likely to eat from the salad bar at school if there was decorations around it,
wow.
as an example, versus when they didn't have the decor. So
just a friendly, warm environment.
Yes.
I say food is our love language in schools, and the kitchen is the heart. The workers are the heartbeat. There's so much love that can be poured into it, both from the trayscape, we call it, like what does your line look like, to like what you just suggested, seasonal decorations and themes really get kids excited. And then you get them hooked in, and then they go, oh, wow, look at that colorful produce bar. And so I think, without having to say, hey, eat your fruits and vegetables, you can really position it to be just a warm, fun environment. I love that. I think that's awesome. Now, it's always not rainbows and roses, right, in schools. So one of the topics, and I don't wonder if this is happening in your practice, enlighten us a little bit. So there's a lot of talk about ultra-processed foods and food dyes. And there's a lot of talk about how we as school professionals can define clean label or embrace in ways clean label. It is concerning, some of our family communities. They bring it to our school nutrition staff or through the wellness committee. They bring, hey, we don't want these types of things offered to our students. So we're working with a lot of our schools to help identify the best quality foods within budget, all of that. It has to be mindful because it is a USDA funded program. So what are your thoughts? What have you been seeing? What is your advice to be hopefully a wet blanket? I know your style is not to, impart panic on parents.
No.
Talk to us a little bit about how you coach families along those topics.
Yeah, I think it is important. And I love that the parents are getting involved. I loved being involved, but at the same time, it is important to be aware of what the barriers are and what the limitations are. And what I tell parents is just knowledge, first and foremost, is you're halfway there. So being able to read a label and understanding that knowing that the first 5 products are typically the most, that's what is the most in that particular package, for example. So like if sugar or a certain dye, which typically the way to identify a dye, for example, is they typically have a number by it. So if you're like, I don't really know how to identify that, then if you see a number, then it's that signifies that. But other things, like if it's hard to read, like if it's some something glycolate phosphate, blah, 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 then that probably means that it's some type of preservative. But I like that you say don't instill panic. I mean, we've been using preservatives for years. I mean, that's why we have salt, for example. But it's being aware of what's appropriate, what's not, what's harmful, and also how to use these things. So, for example, when you do buy something, if it is in plastic, take it out of the plastic. Never heat anything in plastic, and so on. So there's ways to go around the things that make preservatives, for example, a little more scary than they really have to be. But first and foremost, we want to work as hard as we can to be eating whole foods. And by whole foods, meaning that there's not the least amount of products in whatever you're buying as a combination, likely it's going to be the most nutritious. So that doesn't mean you should go to your pantry and start throwing everything out. It just means be aware and just start to set that tone of, from this point, we're going to start to buy things that don't have as many preservatives and dyes and things like that, because they're really there just to kind of make it last longer, which if it lasts longer, then it's probably not as good for you. But also some of the dyes, for example, are there to make it look good. And so if you can find things that are still colorful, because as I just mentioned, if it looks colorful, if it looks appealing, they're more likely to eat it, especially when we're talking about toddlers, for example. But you can find ways to do that without having all the dyes and
I love that.
preservatives that we know in large quantities. And if you're eating it on a daily, regular basis, that it's going to make an impact versus a little candy bar here and there around a seasonal holiday.
Right. And not villainizing food, but just making sure you have, I think you said at the beginning of this, planning. When you go to the grocery store, plan to shop the perimeter. You've heard that, like shop where the fresh fruits and vegetables are. Let your kid come with you and say, hey, what looks good to you? And making those prominent and having a nice balanced plate. I always go back because of my training in nutrition clinically, using the My Plate and making the plate colorful, and also portions of things that help you get all of your vitamins and minerals and your protein and your whole grains and your natural fibers. You can definitely achieve that with whole foods, and do so conveniently, meal prep, family meal prep is something that I think is a fun thing to do when you might have more time on a weekend. I don't know. I have a middle schooler, so like we're at the horse barn and then a piano concert. So maybe weekends aren't it for you, but whatever your day is where you can think a little bit about a grocery list or put together some simple meal prep. Even like you were saying about breakfast, like an overnight oats is a great way to get something prepped so that it's an easy grab and go morning option. So I love that the idea is all foods kind of have a role in our bodies, and knowing which ones optimize its fueling efficiencies and healthfulness starts with whole foods. And so it doesn't have to be more complicated than that.
No, and you talk about modeling. I like to remind parents too, to remind themselves about how they talk about food too, and also about their own bodies, because kids are listening. And so, not villainizing food, not really saying something's good or bad, but really teaching them like what this particular food does or doesn't do for your body, and letting them understand that it's just nurturing, it's nourishing, it's giving you energy, and this gives you more energy than others. And kids can, even my 2-year-old grandbaby, as you mentioned, she understands some of that. And it's really fun to watch that, where she's learning to make choices and understand that.
Yeah.
But I know that I have to model that too, and I think that's important. And I love the perimeter, but I also want to encourage people, make the grocery list together. And especially if you've got a picky eater.
Sure.
And I know that sustainability is really hard too sometimes. And I'm talking about, yes, things that stay on the shelf longer may not be as good for you as we're saying good and bad and not villainizing food. But what I want to suggest too is there's ways that you can plan ahead. Frozen is okay. Frozen fruits and vegetables are just as good and they last longer. Or you can make batches of food and freeze it. Sure. So I had a recipe with something in it, and I thought to myself, I'm making this sauce. I'm not going to use this. I'm going to end up throwing it away. I don't want to waste. So I just made more of it and I froze it for the next time. Perfect. So there's ways to be able to reuse, to not waste, and to budget a little bit.
That. That's a great idea. And work smarter, not harder. We say that in the kitchen all the time. It's like the steps you take to make next time it comes on the menu easier, you already have. Yep. You also bring up a good point. And as a dietitian, we often talk about seasonality and getting foods in season. And so, yes, we love a good local apple right now. And we've done the apple crunch last month and everybody's excited. But you bring up an awesome point. When foods are harvested and flash frozen, they retain that nutrition. And so when you cook them appropriately, like we like to say, a gentle steam or a light roast, you're not, boiling out all the nutrition. You're keeping it vibrant in color. So I think of that beautiful bright green broccoli that you can get frozen that really is tasty for kids, and they love that. So I love that. We talk about making the cafeteria an extension of the classroom, and for these professionals listening on our podcast to seize the day and like own that position of being able to offer up a lesson. If you could encourage our listeners in the school cafeteria, what's one lesson you would encourage them to think about imparting in their space that they can share with students?
I think communicating with the students and really being a part. When you mentioned in the beginning, we're like a family, I love that. And what I remember as a child, and even what my kids would share with me is just talk to the kids and share with them, ask them questions. What do you like about this particular food? Or what is your favorite food? Or I noticed that on these days you like to get such and such, such and such. Tell me more about that. And ask them open-ended questions and really be involved and get their input too. As I mentioned, having parents get input, I think it would be cool if the staff got their input, and make it fun, like I said, because reading that study was really eye-opening to me that they did this where they said that they were more likely to make a salad.
I just love it.
It's so simple.
It is very simple. Our last question we always ask our people that come to be with us on this podcast is a fun one, I think. What was your favorite school lunch, if you could recall, and why? What did you eat as a favorite school lunch?
Wow. Oh, my. And I was one that tend to buy lunch, so this shouldn't be too hard. But honestly, I loved when they would make like spaghetti.
Oh,
like spaghetti and meatballs and breadsticks and salad. They always had a salad. And I would eat the salad too because they're Italian. They made homemade Italian dressing.
Ooh.
And it was so good.
Yummy. Mm-hmm.
And so I can still picture the tray. And the spaghetti lunches were my favorite.
I love that. A good Italian comfort food. I love that. It smells like garlic and basil right now. I can even envision it and smell-o-vision it.
Yes.
Well, Dr. Sara, I am just, again, so grateful for our years of friendship. And you said 20 years ago, and I know it has been a long go for us. And I still find renewed purpose and passion. And I see it in your eyes as you are continuing your work as a pediatrician and my work as a dietitian in schools. I just think we found our calling, and I'm so blessed to have crossed paths with you and still consider you a sister in this good work of public health. I love it.
Thank you for having me on the show.
Absolutely.